From beneath the rubble, sin emerges with determination to confront Solomon and his forces. Guided by the demon Beelzebub, he seeks vengeance. Today's story is Sins of Solomon by Craig Madison. I'm All the Elder, hashtag old not sage, and I'm dressed the way I like, so it must be time for... I was not sure of how long I had been there, or even if I was still alive. It was still night out, possibly the next night, as I had no way of knowing how long I had been trapped under the rubble helpless. However, after much fighting and struggling, I had finally managed to free myself from the crumbling remains of my father's home. Late father, I reminded myself, having watched his life expire at the hands of one of Solomon's assassins. What my father had done or what my father had known that would have caused Solomon to send an assassin after him? As far as I, Sin, knew, my father had been a key supporter and even an enforcer for Solomon before I was born. That, however, had not stopped Solomon's assassin from wielding his angel's holy light to destroy my father. 53 years ago, there was born a man named Solomon who had the ability to subjugate angels and demons into his control. Using his powers, Solomon rose to political power 26 years ago, shortly after my birth, eventually overthrowing the government and destroying all guns and nuclear weapons, using Metatron, the voice of God. Setting himself up as the new ruler of the world, Solomon released his control over most of the angels and demons, some of which he gifted to his loyal guard and assassins. Solomon's birth had ushered in a new age where some humans could subjugate angels and demons to do their bidding or fight for them. Solomon had gathered the strongest of these to himself, the 7 greater keys of Solomon, his strongest numbers and cabinet, the 13 lesser keys of Solomon, his guard and enforcers, and the 6 concubines of Solomon, his elite hit squad. It was a man from Solomon that I had heard my dad fighting as I had tried to make my way downstairs to my father's basement laboratory. The house had been shaking with the struggle of their fight, causing cracks to form in the ceilings and walls and making the entirety of the place unstable. I had stumbled down the stairs, was near the bottom when I heard my father's scream, saw the man in black robes standing over my father, and then the entire building collapsed around them. Why had Solomon sent someone to deal with my father? As far as I knew, my father had no ill will against the current government or the state of the world. He seemed just happy to fiddle around in his laboratory all day and all night, working on whatever project had removed him from me for the last decade or so. I had found my father's cold, lifeless body about an hour or so after I had freed myself. He was lying next to the crushed ruins of his computer, clutching some research notes in his left hand. In his right hand, he still gripped his broken katana, having shattered presumably in his battle with the assassin. I shed tears for my father and then wrapped his body in old packing blankets we had stored in the basement from our move into this place. It was not my first choice to wrap the corpse of my father in. Surely he deserved something more than this packing blanket, but like the silk sheets he had loved so much. But this was the closest thing at hand, and I was not sure if anything above the basement laboratory had survived the collapse of the building. After I had wrapped my father's body, I began to search around my surroundings, looking for a way up and out of the basement. We had neighbors on both sides, so surely someone would have alerted the authorities, but how long until they reached me? I decided then that I would not wait to be rescued, and that I would get myself out of this situation. I did not have time to wait for rescuers, as my father's killer had escaped the collapse and would undoubtedly be making his way back towards Solomon. I could not allow this. Killing my father's killer was now the only thing that mattered to me, and if he got back to Solomon, that would become all but impossible. Isn't it already impossible? I said to myself. The man who had killed my father was not just a man, but a man gifted with subjugation, the ability to control angels or demons. How could he, just a human armed with nothing but his hands and wit, hope to defeat someone who had one of the angels at his command, and someone who had managed to beat his father, who Sin knew from his many stories had once fought side by side with Solomon? That is quite a dilemma, said a low, guttural voice from behind me. I spun around and did not see anyone or anything that could have spoken, but I felt the presence of something dark near me, possibly to my right, near where my dad's desk had previously stood. Who's there? Who are you? I shouted my question out into the darkness, hoping that the noise would not unsteady the wreckage of the house above me. Dad was always in his basement, alone, and never had visitors as far as I was aware. He even rarely let me into the basement to see him on the few occasions I had actually attempted to. If only I had been a better son, more interested in his father's research. But alas, he was dead, and I was left with my self-reputed reputation for being a terrible son. I, my dearest sin, am the demon known as Beelzebub, the demonic prince of gluttony and greed. I had come to heed a summon from someone I owed a favor to, but it appears, alas, that Romulus is dead, leaving you to inherit his favor. My father was owed a favor by a demonic prince? I asked, confused. My dad never mentioned whether or not he had the power to subjugate, or whether or not he had ever used angel or demon power in his fights alongside Solomon. I guess it stands to reason that he would have needed to use one or the other. The thought had just never occurred to me. What could a human man have possibly done to earn the favor of a demonic prince? Reading your thoughts, I can see that you know your father was at least affiliated with Solomon, but you do not know the full extent or nature of their relationship. Romulus was one of, if not Solomon's best warrior in his conquest over humanity. Solomon's power of subjugation was unique in the fact that not only could he control angels or demons, he was also able to control more than one. However, this power alone could not have gotten Solomon to where he was. So your father, along with Solomon's other most trusted, set out into the world destroying armies in their wake with the powers available to them. They accomplished their goal, but instead of letting humanity rule itself without the guns and nuclear weapons, Solomon seized power for himself and sought to remove any who would stand against him. This included the outright destruction of all angels and demons not controlled by him or his people. Your father, upon learning of Solomon's plan, grabbed as many angels and demons as he could and fled Solomon, releasing us as he went. For this act, I awarded Romulus one favor, redeemable via summoning, and if he should pass without using it, it would fall to the next of his line. In this case, you, Sin. I reeled with the expositional onslaught I had just received. My dad, Romulus, the guy who hung out in his laboratory all day and night doing God knows what, was actually a man wanted by the government for foiling its plan for complete domination? What was this? What was happening to my life? Who was the man who killed my father? I asked after a long pause, not sure if Beelzebub knew, or if somehow he could just know or tell. I do not know what human killed your father, said Beelzebub, materializing as a thick black ball of smoke some 5 feet in front of me. I can tell you, however, that the angel involved in the act was Azrael, one of the 7 archangels, which leads me to believe the human to be a greater key of Solomon. Azrael, I asked Beelzebub, the ball of smoke. The archangel which presides over death, it replied. Great. It did not take long to move myself out of the basement, and Beelzebub suggested I leave the body of my father there as a precaution. I did not have time to bury him, he had advised, and he was sure that Solomon was unaware I existed, or else I would more than likely be dead. I wanted to argue against him, but his logical reasoning was very much sound. I'm more than sure that someone worried about being defeated would not have left someone alive behind to take up their father's cause. I had managed to leave the area before the authorities arrived, hoping that I could make it to the diner off. Go back to I had managed to leave the area before. I had managed to leave the area before the authorities arrived, hoping that I could make it to the diner off the highway to catch the news if possible. It was about an hour's walk away from my house, through most of the downtown city of Dover, Delaware, a mostly straight walk down West Division Street until I reached North DuPont Highway, at which point I turned left and continued north until I came upon the diner on my right. I walked into the almost empty diner and first glanced at the clock on the wall, which read 3:06 a.m., July 25th, 2077. So I had spent only a few hours in the basement and not the entirety of the next day. I was relieved. This meant I had a much higher chance of reaching my father's killer before he got back to Solomon. I ordered a large coffee, scrambled eggs with cheddar cheese, and a generous stack of French toast, paying with the chip embedded in my right palm. My father had normally paid for everything we needed, so my government monthly allowance had just been piling up in its account, this being the first time I had actually ever used it. I wondered if I might have been overcharged for the meal, and then pushed the thought from my head. I had revenge to worry about, and the price of energy would not matter as long as that energy allowed me to kill the subjugator of Azrael. Plus, what would I need money for after that? There was no way that my revenge would not end with me dead or in jail, but that was just the price I was willing to pay for my justice. The news was generally the same as always: the rise of machines, the decline of viruses, bacteria, and diseases from amongst humanity, how great the world was without guns and nuclear weapons, how they were preparing to clean Venus's atmosphere now that they had managed to terraform Mars, and the decline of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Finally, after about a half an hour on the same dribble, they usually prattled on about the news mentioned what I had been so keen to hear. The female, if you could call it that, HRS, Humanoid Robotics System, began delivering this part of the news with a more robust tone. Today it was announced that members of Solomon's cabinet, the Greater Keys as they are called, and members of Solomon's party, the Lesser Keys, are expected to be in and around the Dover area. It is being reported that they are staying at the old casino hotel off of the highway in preparation for a huge speech that Solomon will be giving in 2 days at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is unclear if Solomon is in town or even if he will personally deliver the speech, or will it be a hologram. But we will update you as we learn more. Do you think we can get through to Azrael if there are other members nearby? I'm not sure how strong you are or what you can actually do, but I know that each of Solomon's men is strong enough to fight armies. I directed my thoughts towards Beelzebub, who was invisible, but I could sense sitting in the booth across from me. Well, my dearest Sin, I'm glad you finally asked. I can do a hell of a lot of things, no pun intended. The most important of which is to devour divinity and gain strength. That's the main reason Solomon was so keen on finding your father. Your father would know where he released me, or if he had even released me at all. Solomon's main goal was destroying me because I could absorb divinity, and in that way I represent a threat to him. Not the only threat, but definitely high up on the list. What I'm saying is, as long as we defeat the first person and are not fighting more than one person at a time, we should more than be able to manage. As long as you don't mind me absorbing the divinity out of every angel and demon we come across, I should be stronger than every opponent we faced. You get a power-up from eating your brothers and sisters' divinity? When you say it like that, it sounds like something the Greeks would come up with. What's wrong with the Greek gods and goddesses? Well, it's all a little too barbaric for me. Says the guy who eats divinity. But I do not eat my actual siblings. So what happens after you eat their divinity? Pretty much the same thing that would happen to you if I consumed your soul. Lifeless husk? More like a machine with only its base programmed functions. In this case, the angels will try to return to heaven, be unable to, and will probably just lay around lamenting being trapped in a mortal shell until they die. Dark. The demons will do about the same thing, only they'll attempt to return to hell, fail, and probably try to do as much bad as possible in their mortal shells before humans capture or kill them. Not as dark, but still dark. After a short reprieve that included another cup of coffee and a trip to the restroom, Beelzebub and I had a working plan of action and a route we would take. Considering that there was no one looking for us, Beelzebub suggested that we leave the diner and head north up the highway the 40-odd minutes to the hotel. I, however, had one last thing I wanted to do before I committed myself fully to my vengeance. The path I took doubled us back down the way we had come to the diner, back down West Division Street until we reached State Street and turned right, headed towards Silver Lake, a place that held a lot of memories for me. I sat on the single stone bench next to the shore of the lake and watched as the moon reflected in its silver waters, thinking about how my dad had brought me here so many times when I had been a child. I would never be able to visit this place with him again, and it was Solomon and Azrael who were responsible. By killing my father, they had entered debt, and I was on my way to collect with interest. The walk from Silver Lake to the hotel was only about 20 minutes, give or take, cut short by my drive and determination to reach my destination as soon as possible. I could feel the blood rushing around my body, heating me up beneath my skin, boiling away the anger I stored and stoked within myself. As we reached the hotel, towering over the buildings around it, its many windows looking like eyes around the parking lot, I noticed two women standing outside the entrance nearest to us, one blonde and one brunette. If I remember correctly, the old casino was to our left, and the main rooms were past these two women. What do you think? I asked Beelzebub, indicating the two women guarding the door. You think they're like hotel security, or? I doubt Solomon would trust anyone but his loyal servants to guard him. Odds are these women belong to one of the three groups: the greater keys, the lesser keys, or the concubines of Solomon. What are the concubines of Solomon? I asked. To me, a concubine was someone that you were romantically involved with, but was not your significant other. Solomon's elite hit squad, 6 women with subjugation and loyalty to none but Solomon. Should we try to separate them and take them down one by one? Over by the entrance, one of the women, the brunette, began to walk towards us, drawing sighs from her belt as she did so. I stopped talking to Beelzebub and readied myself to fight. My dad had sparred with me before I was a teenager, teaching me a little about how to defend myself, but I had no idea how well what I was taught would work against a trained assassin. I pushed these negative thoughts from my head and focused on what I knew. Beelzebub's smoke overlapped my body, his soul touching my soul and becoming one with my vessel. I felt a surge of strength and power as we became one and caught flashes of memories from his past. I saw him, Beelzebub, being scolded by a powerful figure cloaked only in light so bright it felt like I would be unmade if I continued to look. The memory ended and I was standing in the hotel parking lot, black smoke swirling around me as the brunette reached me. There are no visitors allowed here in this area. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Me and Beelzebub just smiled and walked towards her. The power surging through me felt amazing. It almost felt as if I was invincible, like I was one of the strongest beings in creation. The brunette gave us no chance to get closer. As I reached her, she slashed horizontally across my belly, which I dodged by leaning backward. My father and I had never sparred with live weapons, just wooden swords and bow staffs. Envision a black sword in your head. Focus on condensing the power of me flowing through you into your hand. I did as Beelzebub urged and was rewarded with a long black-bladed katana, which seemed to be both solid and gaseous at the same time. I swung downwards with the sword, aiming to bisect the assassin in front of me. She turned to the left, my blade whistling by her as she did so. Stabbing out with her right hand, I parried the blow with my left hand, grabbed the wrist of her arm, and smashed my head as hard as I could against hers. She recoiled back, reeling from the blow and unsteady. I raised the sword over my head, envisioned the smoke condensing around the blade into the flames of hell itself. Beelzebub, devour, as you wish. The second assassin proved to be just as easy, if not easier, than the first, probably made so by the fact that Beelzebub had absorbed the previous spider's divinity. We absorbed her divinity and then made our way into the building, whose lobby was completely empty. They must have a lot of faith in those two, Beelzebub remarked, looking around the empty lobby. I was quite sure we would be surrounded once we got inside, maybe even get to fight all of Solomon's men. You were expecting us to get slaughtered, weren't you, Beelzebub? Well, to be honest with you, if I was Solomon, I wouldn't have such lax security, and it definitely wouldn't have been this easy to reach me. He's been a figurehead for too long. Like most men, Solomon thinks he's untouchable because he's never been touched. It's a sense of security built out of never having experienced anything but being safe, which is exactly how I know we're going to beat him. Solomon would never expect that someone with no prior knowledge or barely any ability would be able to get through his guards, let alone him, explained Beelzebub. So we're going to defeat the wisest man to ever exist using his own hubris? I asked, confused. I mean, it worked for him, so why not for us? I laughed at this. Seriously, what truly wise men would have so many wives and concubines? Beelzebub, the demonic prince of comedy. He had a point, and so I remained silent and headed into the elevator, pushing the button for the second to highest floor. We would get off one floor early and come up the stairs, as coming out of the elevator onto the most protected floor of the building just didn't seem like it would work out in our favor. In retrospect, getting off only one floor early might not have been the best decision either. As I opened the door onto the top floor of the hotel, it was blasted off its hinges, splintering into thousands of shards from the blast of lightning that struck it. Then a fist came punching through the opening, catching me in the chest and knocking me back against the rail. I braced myself against it and balanced myself, careful not to let the force of the blow carry me back and over the rail to my death some stories below. I focused on releasing as much of Beelzebub's smoke as possible, trying to create a smoke screen to hide myself. Maybe I could get him to think he sent me over the edge and use that to send him over. This stinks of hell smoke. Is that you, little Beels? Said the mocking voice of our aggressor. Ramiel, said Beelzebub with a hint of sadness in his voice. Ramiel, please leave here at once. Out of all our brothers and sisters, you alone are my favorite. Just walk away and leave here. You don't owe humans anything, and I damn sure don't want to take your divinity from you. Is that what you did to them? Shouted Ramiel through the smoke, looking around for any sign of us. Is Azrael here, Ramiel? Tell me now and I'll let you leave divinity intact. You can go back home to Dad, and me and little Sin here will clean up Solomon's mess, returning the course of the future to the path set before it by God. You know as well as I do that Solomon manipulated his reincarnation in order to subvert the plan God had set up for mankind. Do you really mean to let this human subvert God? Do you think that our Father does not have the ability to subvert any course which a human sets? Don't make me laugh, Beels. If Solomon was able to reach this far, it is as God intended, said Ramiel, reaching out in front of him, still searching for me. Doesn't that same train of logic hold for me and Sin's presence here? Do you think it chanced that Romulus had a kid by a concubine that even Solomon in all his wisdom did not know about? The amount of power required to hide such a thing for him could only have come about via the will of God. And you mean to tell me, Beels, that our Father, who damned you to start, who you betrayed, would take it upon himself to have you be the instrument of his wrath? What better instrument than a sword so sharp it can cut even the hand who wields it? What better an instrument than one that does not distinguish between friend or foe? I am here to cut down all who stand in the way of my peace, as I always have. Father be damned. And with this, Sin reached out and grabbed Ramiel, having circled around behind him in the darkness. Any last words before I drain your divinity? Maybe an apology for bringing up my personal matters in front of the human. You always had time for jokes, Beels. If you had ever poured any of that wit and humor into doing your job, maybe you wouldn't have ended up as a demon to start with. Well, you know what we say in hell, don't you, Ramiel? Demons do it better. And we drained the divinity from his favorite brother and continued down the hall towards the presidential suite, where we knew beyond a shadow of a doubt Azrael was waiting. Before we entered the suite, I leaned against the wall to rest. I was panting and sweating profusely, though I knew not if it was from fatigue or anxiety. Deep breaths, my dearest Sin, floated the voice of Beelzebub into my head. It seemed sweeter and softer now, almost angelic, and it had lost most of its guttural quality. Was absorbing all of this divinity from these high-powered sources changing Beelzebub in a way that neither of us had foreseen? And what was this I was feeling? This heaviness against my breast, making it hard to take deep breaths. That would probably be the aura of Michael or Azrael. Both auras have the ability to unnerve and panic humans. Though I assume if it were Azrael's aura, you would be more sluggish, since it literally drains the life force from any living thing within a small radius of it. I groaned. Of course Beelzebub had forgotten to mention something so important about our target. What more did I expect from a demon who enjoyed making jokes and generally being a degenerate? I resent what you're thinking about me, he chimed in again. The aura doesn't mess with angels or demons, so I completely forgot about its existence. You expect me to remember something that never caused me a problem? I'm more worried about Michael's strength and Azrael's blade, since these are the things that can really damage us. The aura is more of an unnerving mind game that causes weaker-willed people to back off and leave. Once you resolve yourself to face it, the aura should lose its effect on you, especially coupled with the fact that you have me. I pulled myself upright and wiped my brow. There was no use being worried about it now, and no reason to put it off any longer. My father's killer was through this door, and there was no way I was going to turn around and leave without facing him. No way I would leave without watching him die and having Beelzebub eat his brother's divinity. I reached for the door handle, but before I could grab it, the door was ripped open and a giant, almost bear-sized fist came flying through the opening, hitting me square in the chest and sending me flying down the hallway right into the wall next to the stairs. A little early for our apocalyptic rematch, isn't it, Beelzebub? Asked Michael, stepping into the hallway. He was undoubtedly the largest man I had ever seen, towering what had to be a staggering 8 feet or more. I gulped as I pulled myself up from the ground, dazed and bleeding from a wound on my chest. You weren't kidding about his strength, I said to Beelzebub as I righted myself, focusing the darkness to function as a bandage over my wound. The impact from the blow had felt almost like getting hit by a bus. I assumed only the bus probably hurt less. I shook the stars from my eyes and then started back towards the door, focusing on the darkness in my hand to form not a sword this time, but a long black twisted rope. I hope you're not planning to whip my brother into submission. I don't think that is his type of kink. He strikes me as the type to have daddy issues. I tried not to laugh as Michael came bursting out of the room at full speed. Head lowered like a bull, he grabbed me around the waist and lifted, carrying me backwards towards the wall, which he proceeded to ram me into repeatedly. The hotel shook with the weight of its blows, cracks from the continued impacts of my body against the wall. I threw the rope around the back of Michael's neck and prepared myself for what was coming next. The wall gave out, and Michael threw me as hard as he could, sending me whirling in the direction of the now dilapidated racetrack. The rope I had thrown around his neck held and brought him with me as we neared the statue of the monster for which the track got its name. I maneuvered behind him as best I could, tightening the rope around my hands and pulling. Michael's face began to turn colors as he struggled against the rope, pulling harder and harder against it as it crushed the windpipe of his host. He turned blue and then purple, but I continued to hold the rope for what felt like hours until the human shuddered and was no more. Beelzebub drained Michael's divinity and then kicked him a few times before we realized someone was watching us from the shadows. "Is that you, Azrael?" said Beelzebub in a sweet, almost singing voice that bordered on mockery. "I knew you liked to watch the fun, but even for you, this is beyond creepy." "Why are you here eating divinity?" asked Azrael as a double-edged blade appeared in his hand. "The same reason you killed this man's father, Azrael. All of us have our parts to play, and I'm just here to do what is my part, the eating of my sibling's divinity." We charged at each other, Beelzebub's darkness and my hatred propelling us towards my father's killer. I knew above all that I would have to avoid taking any hits from Azrael's blade. A single cut, no matter how small, would be enough to end my life and put an end to my vengeance. I focused mainly on Azrael's hands, hoping to disarm him of his weapon so that we could get close enough for Beelzebub to eat his divinity. Azrael, however, was very skilled with a blade, almost like a blade dancer. The way his blade seemed to glide from one hand to the next, avoiding my every attempt to separate the two. Azrael was by far the most superior opponent I had ever faced, though I have no idea how he added up in Beelzebub's opinion. After hours of back and forth with no one really gaining a hand up on the other, I finally stood over the body of my father's killer, his own blade sticking out of his heart. Beelzebub had caught him off guard, pressing a pressure point in his wrist to make him drop the sword, which I then caught and deposited into my new bank account, his heart. The sound of clapping erupted behind us, and I turned to face him, Solomon himself shining bright in the radiance of the now rising sun. "And who might you be, that you should defeat 2 of my assassins and 3 of my greater keys?" Something about this voice held authority, and I could neither resist the urge to speak or to full on tell him the truth. "And who might you be, that you could defeat 2 of my assassins and 3 of my greater keys?" Something about this voice held authority, and I could neither resist the urge to speak or to full on tell him the truth. "My name is Sin, the son of the late Romulus." "And the demon you share your flesh with?" "Beelzebub," he answered for himself, though without his normal flair. "How long a time it's been since I've seen you, Lord Solomon. You look old, as if reincarnation somehow aged you further than the years you've lived again." "Speak not." And Beelzebub was silent. "I possess the ultimate and divine power, the voice of God himself, the Metatron. How do you ever hope to overcome me?" The funny thing about that, my most repugnant Solomon, is that the Metatron's ability only works on things that are of equal or less divinity to him. So that way, for example, he can't betray God and use his power to overthrow him. "So, you're a demon, Beelzebub. That puts you well below the threshold for obedience, and the human even more so." "Aren't you forgetting something, O wise king? All demons were once angels, and there is at least one angel whose divinity can compare even to that of Metatron." I could tell the expression on Solomon's face was becoming worried, but I was not exactly sure why. Had Beelzebub realized something that would make him able to overcome such an insane power as absolute control over everything? You undoubtedly already know that Romulus sought me out and hid me from you because of my ability to devour divinity. But I doubt even you know who I was before I fell, who I was before I had divinity stripped from me and became the demon Beelzebub. You can't be. Your father cast you into the lake of fire. What is it you humans always claim? My father is a merciful father. I was stripped of my power and station, cast out of heaven by Michael, but I did not get cast into hell. At the last moment, my father intervened and saved me, casting me among the humans to live beside the evils I had wrought. For I, above all else, have the ultimate power as an angel. I am Samael Samyaza, the one who holds God's true name. You wouldn't dare, started Solomon's voice, but it never finished. With the utterance of God's name, Solomon was unmade, and the divinity contained within Metatron was absorbed by Beelzebub. I collapsed in the sunlight, the decaying monster statue staring down on me, the only witness to my revenge. Samael stood before me, cloaked in holy light so bright I could not bear to look at him. Sin, son of Romulus, in exchange for the favor of getting rid of my enemy, I offer you one boon within my ability to grant, so long as it doesn't subvert the rules of nature. I looked around at the world around me, wondered about all the people out in the world who still had power over angels and demons, and a solution occurred to me. No more subjugation of angels or demons. Remove all such supernatural creatures from this dimension. And it was done. The end.